Yo, welcome back to another video. This is WWE heel turns nobody asked for. Let me set up the screen capture so I don't forget. Okay, we got it up. Yep, it's right there. So, let's get right into it. This video is like 18 minutes. I got somewhere to be at 2. So I got some time. So let's get right into it.
What did you put inside of me?
Get it out of me.
FX's American Horror Stories. Screaming October 26th, only on Hulu.
Alright, as these ads, and we can't even skip them.
Werther's Original Caramels. Discover the original fall flavor.
In wrestling, there's some heel turns that absolutely nobody asked for. Alright, let's get into it. Bret Hart's departure from the WWF in 1997 was touted as a huge opportunity for WCW to add insult to injury and completely dominate the Monday Night Wars. The company was in very great spirits after a successful year that saw the apex of the NWO storyline, a flourishing cruiserweight division, and an interesting set of characters that dominated the show. Bret Hart was, no pun intended, the heart and soul of the WWF. He had been with the company for almost 13 years, and a sad exit provided the chance for WCW to give his career the closure he desperately deserved with the WWF. However, the moment he stepped in a WCW ring, they didn't know what to do with him. The biggest problem with Bret Hart's signing was that he was too big for the mid-card, and he had no place in the main event. Not based on his talent, because at the end of the day, Bret Hart absolutely belonged at the upper card with the best of the best, such as Sting and Hollywood Hulk Hogan, but a lot was different with WCW compared to WWF. He came at a time where they already signed all these guys, and in many ways, they took him for granted. So a red-hot Bret Hart, fresh off the heels of Montreal, was underutilized in the worst way possible. Well, maybe not, because he could have debuted and lost to El Dandy. He was pretty cold only 3 months after debuting, and what did he decide to do? Give him the most random heel turn. Why? Because there was no long-term plan with Bret Hart. He wasn't really buddies with the guys at the top, and he slowly fell down the card. They didn't try too hard with him before even doing the turn. He was out here helping Sting take down the NWO in his debut, fighting alongside the likes of Randy Savage, and not too long after, decides to screw him over. Maybe that should have been his gimmick as a heel, screwing over people like he was screwed over himself. Mr. McMahon's forming of the corporation did a nice job of adding another hurdle for Stone Cold Steve Austin to overcome leading up to WrestleMania 15. It added another chapter to their ongoing story and showed the depths that McMahon would go in order to screw over Austin. Completely distracted by Stone Cold Steve Austin, McMahon didn't make a big deal out of The Undertaker forming the Ministry of Darkness. The faction promised to run roughshod on the WWF and in turn take over the company. It was a gradual process for them to reach the desk of Mr. McMahon, but once they did, the faction had his undivided attention. This story expanded to involve his family, and it turned him face. McMahon as a face also meant he'd interact with Stone Cold in different ways. Both men had a common enemy, being the newly formed corporate ministry, and it was a two-headed serpent that required the great help of Stone Cold Steve Austin for Mr. McMahon to actually go face-to-face with them. Amidst all of this, The Undertaker was promoting a higher power of sorts, somebody that was greater than him and Shane McMahon. Turns out, it was Vince himself. This decision makes sense, but at the same time doesn't. If you watch the story from the beginning, it's illogical for Vince to be the mastermind. He was assaulted on multiple occasions, and the entire structure of the storyline didn't fit him as the guy. On the other side, yes, Mr. McMahon would go to the depths of hell to screw over Stone Cold, so maybe he'd injure himself, harm his family if it meant Austin wasn't the guy. That said, nobody asked for this. He was never the best choice with the way the story was going, and it accomplished nothing. It only turned the story into a hybrid of the Austin and McMahon feud, which already involved The Undertaker a year earlier. They felt reliant on a story that didn't need to be brought back so soon, especially at a time where Austin and McMahon were in a fresh situation, siding with each other despite having animosity. Unlike WCW, though, this did not hurt the company in the slightest. Any problem for the WWF in 1999 was quickly burned through and overlooked because the product as a whole was red hot. They were doing so damn well back then. Sting's time in WCW after Starrcade 1997 was all over the place, but no decision was stranger than the one to turn him heel in 1999. Sting was entirely right in this feud with Hulk Hogan. His problems with him were entirely logical, and watching these shows with no additional context, you'd think he was the face. Fans couldn't bring themselves to boo him because not only was Sting already beloved, but he became even cooler. It was such a bad decision that they turned him back only 2 months later. It's a problem the WWF found themselves in 2 years later with Stone Cold Steve Austin. Goldberg. Goldberg's streak left an indelible imprint on his career. It had a strong grip on his WCW run because the moment he lost, you can't really think about a couple of memorable moments from his time in the company afterwards, especially on the positive side. At one point, he injured himself breaking a car window and had to go away. So upon his return, they had the great idea to turn him heel at a time where the fans were craving a push for him. Goldberg's heel turn was one of the strangest in wrestling history because when you take him out of the equation, WCW didn't have many strong figures to lead the company, and this was in a time period of turmoil. Hogan left, their biggest stars were injured and not the same as they once were. Goldberg was the perfect catalyst to turn things around, and similar to Sting, Goldberg wasn't really hated. You can't hate somebody that was cooler than just about everyone on the roster. What made Goldberg cool as a heel was that he looked even stronger, and he had a certain aura that nobody at the time in WCW matched. It took them only a month to realize that his heel turn was a mistake. It wasn't a costly one though, because if it was, everyone would still be talking about it to this day, but since it happened in July 2000, it's not mentioned. It was never going to be a costly error because WCW already messed up in the last year and a half, and his face turn in itself was him going off script, which is an entirely different story. Rikishi. The latter half of the Attitude Era had an entirely different vibe around it. WWF seemed more interested in building up the young talent, and with a couple of names from WCW and
Rikishi said he liked the heel turn, but he just wished it would have went a little different.
Standpoint. The new talent did a lot more lifting compared to 1998 and had more openings.
I'm a bad man.
One of those men that took advantage was Rikishi. He had a strong in-ring presence, but also had a great personality and charisma about him. Before his push was pissed on, he was considered one of the future of the WWF. And this is all in spite of him wearing a thong and moving his ass around like a goofy. Rikishi was doing perfectly well as a competitive mid-carder that could face the very best, such as Triple H, so it made his heel turn all that stranger. Stone Cold Steve Austin was ran over at Survivor Series in November of 1999, the very same month Rikishi debuted and prospered, and he was clearly not supposed to be him on paper. It was most likely Billy Gunn, but he didn't have that vibe about him to feud with Stone Cold. Plans for Rikishi to actually be the one to run over Stone Cold were made in motion in February of 2000, which makes things even stranger. So they made the story originally. Rikishi hadn't been called up to the main roster yet, and all that. And only 3 months in, when he was showed that he was popular, he was a good guy, fans loved him, they had already made plans for him to be the one. And Rikishi was so out of the left field. There was no problem in the shock factor, but everything else is a different story. It ruined his career. First of all, it was too high of a jump to feud with Stone Cold, not to mention a returning Stone Cold. And it takes away everything about his character. I did it for The Rock. I did it for the people. I did it for my family. Second, that position was never going to be filled by anyone on the roster because Triple H was exempt. Undertaker feuding with Austin again? That didn't make sense. And in the same role as a heel as well? No. They feuded too many times in the past couple of years. It sounds kind of weird now, but Chris Benoit fit the role. For Rikishi, it took away everything that made him special. He was pigeonholed in a role that didn't fit him at all. Rikishi at his best is a babyface, plus his attire as a heel was so odd. Rikishi was in a position few would have made the most of. Stone Cold. Stone Cold Steve Austin's return in late 2000 was a very welcoming one. The Texas Rattlesnake gave an already stacked main event scene yet another character, but plans were certainly different this time around. Austin as a wrestler wasn't as strong as previously. I'm not talking in-ring. In-ring, I'd say he was a bit better, but as a character, the booking of his, he wasn't as strong. He'd show shades of that resiliency, such as the time he won the Royal Rumble. However, it was mostly him failing to overcome the challenges ahead. Triple H beat him decisively in the 3 stages of Hell match, and in the lead up to WrestleMania 17, Stone Cold assured The Rock that he'll do anything to come out on top. And anything could mean anything. So when he sided with Mr. McMahon, it proved his claims correct. However, this was a colossal mistake. A mistake I don't think the WWE will ever top. Because Austin was in his home state of Texas. Rock was getting booed. They weren't going to turn on their own guy no matter what. And in addition, yes, it makes sense Austin got desperate. The way the story was going, they literally explained to you, Stone Cold will do anything to win the WWF Championship. He'll do more than The Rock could ever imagine. He lost that step, but would he really side with the boss? That's not the biggest problem. It's the fact that they did this heel turn at a time where Austin was still red hot and the number 1 guy.
Alright, thanks all for watching. I'm gonna be back in a minute. I gotta go do something.